Hi, my name is Brian. I tutor philosophy, primarily logic, but I also tutor, a wide variety of subjects in philosophy. I'm in the Vancouver area up in British Columbia in Canada, but I'm happy to remotely tutor anywhere in the world. If you're interested, my details are in the information box. Click on that, you can contact me directly. Today, I want to offer some tips on logic, on formal deductive logic. This is often a second year course in university or college, depending on where you are. Third year courses are beyond the scope of what I'm going to discuss. This is going to be an introductory lesson. Sometimes it's a first year course. Computer science majors, this is not about your course, this is about the philosophy course. So it is both more in depth and different in a number of ways. First thing I want to deal with is different courses use different symbols to convert English conjunctions and disjunctions and whatnot into their symbols. So I've just laid out the two kind of most common sets, where we can see at the very top here we've got X and Y up at the very top there, which are often used for this dot. The alternative system you'll see is this kind of upside down V, or it's the caret on the keyboard. That's the X or Y is common to both of these symbols. It's like an uppercase V. You may sometimes see a V with a line underneath, and that's an exclusive OR, which I'm not going to be discussing in these tips videos. We'll be using the inclusive OR only. If then, if X, then Y, often just said as if then, is this horseshoe shape, this sideways horseshoe, or it's an arrow. And the triple bar here is known as the biconditional, or the if and only if marker, or known as the material conditional, and that's often represented as this double-headed arrow on both sides. So in this video and any other videos I do, I'm going to be using this system on the left hand side here. If you get lost, refer back to this, or just search in Google. If you just look up formal logic symbols, if you do like that 3-word search, you are going to get a ton of images which list out all the various permutations here. The system that I learned from, that I'm pulling these symbols from, and the logic questions I'll be doing, I'm all pulling from the text Logic and Philosophy by Hausman, Kahane, and Tidman. The book I'm working from is the 10th edition. I'm not going to give page numbers that I pulled stuff from because I'm only going to be using it as a light reference. They use a particular notation for subproofs. I will, if we need to, I'll show another way to mark a subproof that is found in an alternate system. Your system may vary because different profs use different systems, and there's two main ones that I've seen, but I'm sure there are many more that I've never seen. So this is a problem I've taken from that textbook, the Logic and Philosophy textbook, and this is going to be a formal deductive proof. And one of the common problems that I see many students have is they get stuck not knowing how to proceed because they can't see the proof, like that they can't see their way to the proof. So here we have our initial, our given premise on the left hand side, and then over here on the right is our goal, right? So we have A, or, and then the negation of B and C, and our goal is if B is the case, then it's the case that if C is the case, then A is the case. Right? So B, therefore bracket C, therefore A, close bracket. Just in case you can't read by handwriting. Now, this is a problem because you can't see your way to the end. And I'm not saying that the problem is that you can't see to the end. I'm saying you can't see to the end. You just can't. And therefore the problem is you thinking that you should be able to, and then getting stuck, in the just frozen because you think you should. And it's not the case that you should. Now, someone who has a lot of practice at stuff can kind of visualize in their head big kind of chunks of information about how this should go. And so like when I see this, in my head I have an outline of how it's going to complete, but I still can't see it line for line written out, because when it's completed it looks like this. It's 8 lines long. Now there's a fair chunk of information here, and it's a simple biological fact that our brains can't hold all that information in our head at once. We just can't. If you take a first year psychology course, you'll learn that our short-term memory can only hold 7 pieces of information plus or minus 2, and by piece of information they mean like numbers. So, like a letter, a number, right? Whether or not that can be expanded by practice is a whole other thing. Chunking is a whole other thing. But the bottom line is that in an area where you're learning, in a thing that is new to you, it is unreasonable to think that you can see in your mind all the way to the end, through all of it, through all the rules and the assumed premises and the connection between rules and what you're going to get and what you need to do in each step, how to complete this. It's just not an option. So what you need to do is take one line at a time and just see what you can do and do that. And that's it. One line at a time. Don't think about what's next in the step after that. Don't get focused on what came before that. Just do one line at a time. Like when I'm tutoring people in person, I kind of joke about it's kind of like a Zen approach. Here and now is what matters. Not the future, not the past, here and now. Another thing students get stuck on is how to start something like this. How do I even begin a problem like this? And as you progress in logic, in deductive logic, you will start to understand that the solutions, the thinking, comes in a kind of a back and forth between looking at what your goal is and going back to the problems that you have. So you want to resolve whatever you can that's immediately in front of you, and then maybe look to the solution, to the goal for a hint, a suggestion of how to approach things, and then go back to doing things one step at a time. So, for example, in this problem, I see that my solution, again, my goal, I see that my goal has, conditionals in it. That the primary operator, the main operator is often the terminology, is a horseshoe, right? Is a conditional. So we have a rule that lets us create that allows us to create a conditional, and that's a conditional proof. So the conditional proof, like the concept behind it, is you can just make something up, right? And you can make up anything you want. There are no limits. Like if in the middle of this, I could, if I wanted to, choose that I'm going to assume Q, right? You can assume anything you like, and that thinking, that assumption, is not going to help. So you want to make assumptions that guide you somewhere. And this is where we start to learn that assumptions aren't necessarily bad, right? But assumptions need to be tested. Do assumptions get us where we're going? And if an assumption is wrong, does that give us any useful information? I mean, that's kind of a central tenet of logic. Just merely making assumptions and taking those assumptions as a given is bad. So in this particular case, I understand that, okay, my goal right now is B conditional blah blah blah. So the way we start a conditional proof is by assuming everything that's to the left of a conditional. So I'm just going to mark that in a red line. So everything to the left of the conditional. Now, if there was like 20 characters, if that was like a really long thing, we would assume the whole thing. But here we have B all by itself, which is very straightforward. So I'm going to assume B in my line number 2. And now I'm going to go back to this proof and ask myself, okay, can I use that B directly to solve anything? And in this case, the answer is no. You can't do anything with that at all, right? I'm going to mark this as an assumed premise. To remind myself, I have assumed this. Now, it's important that, especially when starting out, you don't lose track of what your new goals are. So in this particular case, I have assumed B, so I don't need to prove B, therefore C, therefore A anymore, because I have B. B's right there. It's an assumption, but I have it, so to speak. So now I have a new goal, and the new goal is for this subproof. And the subproof, the goal of that is going to be C, therefore A, i.e. the bit that's left, everything to the right of the initial horseshoe, right, of the initial conditional. That's my new goal. So I have to keep that in mind. Now, trying to keep stuff in your head means, by nature of human biology, you are going to forget. You are going to forget. You are going to get distracted. You are going to get laser focused on something, and what you need to get is going to go out of your head. So you need to write this down, right? You need to write it down. Maybe not for the rest of your career in philosophy, but for now, for your first couple of weeks or months of doing deductive philosophy, write down your goal. I've been doing this stuff for years and I still write it down. Why? Because it's one less thing for me to remember. It's less of a cognitive load. I'm thinking about fewer things. The piece of paper, in this case Google Jamboard, it can remember for me. So why do I need that burden? Now, I mentioned earlier on that there are a couple of different ways to mark subproofs. So the system that I won't be using marks them like so. Right, and here's our new subproof, and I would write my numbers down the side here. But I'm going to be consistent with the system I'm taking from Hoswin, Kahane's, and Tidman's Logic and Philosophy. And what they do is they have a line they draw on the outside. In their little text, they have a little thing in here that points to an arrow, and that is inconvenient to draw, so I just draw a line here, and then this comes at the end. But I'm going to draw the line at the end of the subproof. I would encourage you, so let me model that behavior. This is the behavior I would encourage. Draw the lines along the side as you go. And that way you don't forget I'm in a subproof. Now in this particular case, because there's nothing we can do with that B by itself, but look, again, we have a conditional as our target, as our goal. So what we should do in that case is, again, to create a conditional, we need a conditional proof. So I'm now going to make an additional subproof, like so. Let's neaten these lines up a little. All right, so our 3 is going to go here, and our here. So now, in this new subproof, I have a new goal. So I have assumed everything to the left of the conditional, and now my new goal is everything to the right of conditional, which is just A. So now we want to ask ourselves, is there anything I can do to make this work, to connect these two things together, to solve anything? And even if you don't see 3 or 4 steps ahead, you can see, oh, well, I could put B and C together, right? And in this system, this is called a conjunction. And I need to mark what lines that came from. In other systems, it's an AND introduction. right? There's another system in another text where they use introductions and eliminations as the rules. All the rules are named like that. So I'll try to remember to name them using the other system, but most of them I'm just going to focus on this. So here's a conjunction. And now I can see, okay, look, well, my main operator in premise number 1 is a disjunction, right? It's an or. And I know that if one thing or the other is a true statement, at least one of them must be true. But if I can negate one of them, then the other must be true. So like, I'm holding a pen in one hand and the moon in the other hand. So if I can prove that I'm not holding the moon in one hand, then I am definitely holding a pen in the other hand. It has to be true, right, out of the two ors. And if you think about how we use or in everyday language, that will start to make more and more sense to you. It's simpler. And bear in mind that these logic systems, they were created in order to convert everyday language into logical symbolic systems. So the logic in these logic systems comes from our language use. It didn't come out of nowhere. So the strict thing that needs to happen is I need something that is the negation of all of one disjunct, right? Everything to one side of the disjunction. So I need all of that negated in order to do what we call a disjunctive syllogism. So B and C, what I can do is I can stick two negations in front of it like so. I can double negate line 4. And two negations are the same as no negation. So logically, there is no logical difference between lines 4 and 5. They are logically equivalent, right? So now that I have that, I now have, if we put this box off here, you can now see that I have the negation of the right-hand side disjunct, which means I can now get A, because I know I have shown from an assumption, like if it's the case that C is true, well, from C it follows that the negation of B and C is true, and if that's true, well then A is true. So if C is true, A is true, is what I've shown, because C is an assumption, so it's always going to be if. And that gives us the disjunctive syllogism. It's line 1 and lines 1 and 5. So that's the end of that subgroup. So I'm going to box it off like this, and then my conclusion from that is always the thing I assumed, therefore the thing I concluded. Right? The very first thing I put in, therefore the very last line. And it's important to conceptualize it that way, because sometimes the line we end up on in longer proofs, it actually turns out like we change our mind about the goal. We want to do something else instead, and the thing that we thought was the goal was not actually the goal. So there's going to be CP, and for conditional proof, and that's going to be lines 3 through 6. And now that I have that C, therefore A, if we look back to my goal on line number 2, well, that was my goal, and I have it, and I'm done. And there we have B, horseshoe, C, horseshoe A, or B, therefore bracket C, therefore A. And I really should try to write the therefore correctly, eh? That would be helpful. The thing about mistakes is they're fine so long as you catch them. And that would be, again, conditional proof, and that would be lines 2 through 7. And you can see that's what I've already done here. It's identical, because of course it is. Now, are there other ways to solve this? Sure, there are very different ways. And if you're using a different system that doesn't allow for disjunctive syllogism, so the one I mentioned before that uses the introductions and eliminations, that one, I can't remember the name of the text offhand, that doesn't allow for disjunctive syllogism. You have to do like an or elimination, which is, frankly, massively inconvenient. But that's something you can get around. You can solve it a different way. And this problem, because it is logically valid, the conclusion is logically deductible from the initial premise, you can solve it under that system too. But I'm not going to go through that in this video. So there's a number of tips and ideas in there that I hope you found helpful. If you'd like some more direct help, I can be reached via brylin.net. You can reach out to me there. There's an email submission form there, and I would love to hear from you. Be you in the Vancouver area or not, I'm happy to remotely tutor anyone, and we can discuss my rates there.